As I stare fixated on my phone, endlessly scrolling, no end goal seems to materialize, and there was no memory of how I picked up, ended on either Instagram, Reddit, or various chat group apps. An ingrained habit, albeit one that is highly addictive and highly repetitive. My to-do list pile up, and the guilty feeling of squandered potential manifests in my brain until I feel overburdened by my own mental to-do lists. I rejoice in a static, uninspiring, sanguine world of my smartphone. I pick up, desensitize myself further, and scroll, and scroll, and scroll. The quiet conquering of our minds. This is the Haiku Podcast, the first episode, which I'll be rambling, musing on distraction and stimulation. The current age we live in has been defined by the Anthropocene, the destruction of our planet around us, the age of post-truth, and a decade of the weathering of our prized democratic institutions. But I would argue this age could also be defined by an endemic distraction and stimulation. The current age we live in has been defined by the Anthropocene, the destruction of our planet around us, the age of post-truth, and a decade of the weathering of our prized democratic institutions. But I would also argue this age could be defined by endemic distraction and stimulation. How this has happened, I believe, is both intentional and not. A cynical and politicized perspective on this endemic distraction and stimulation that blights our collective psyche. Our endless distraction and insatiable stimulation is an effective strategy to sedate the masses. As much as Mark mused on institutional religion being an opiate for the masses, the new church of smartphones has pacified us. Idle scrollers are easier to contain than an enlightened populace. And secondly, maybe causally, the indulgence of smartphones and social media enables us to narcissistically indulge in ourselves has in turn led to a world atomized, divided, and distrustful, more and more by the day. Community issues and the state of the world only come through a small, narrow window, often tainted by ideological bias from source to consumer. Now, was this intentional? That meaning, did a group of powerful elites gather in a room one day and design a blueprint for a way to control the masses? Well, yes and no. I'll start by framing the context of how we arrived here. I'll start a long time ago, interwar America in fact, when the Church of Public Relations was first invented by Edward Bernays, nephew of Freud and a man who conceptualized how to control the masses during peacetime. His plan? Well, to turn an individual into an endless consumer. Consuming items not for reasons of utility and need, but instead as a means for a person to establish and convey their identity. Conveying who you are by what you wore allowed marketing execs to use psychoanalysis on the populace. It posited to the public, we know how unique, special, and wonderful you are. It's time you showed that to the world. And it worked. Consumption capitalism and later in history, the neoliberal elite allowed us unbounded freedom as a given. But this freedom given to the masses was defined within very narrow parameters. Freedom to consume, to individuate, and to put your self-interest first, but not to challenge the status quo. Ayn Rand, an early 20th century thinker, hypothesized this further. With her book Atlas Shrugged, she imagined a world governed by self-interest. This world, she suggested, would progress far beyond one built on altruism. This Randian way of thinking has been adopted by Reagan, Thatcher, and the tech gurus of Silicon Valley. So this hypothesized world Rand put forth materialized and was solidified, ingrained, and accepted. A world that caters to the pursuit of the individual. One that would triumph over that of the society that was coalesced around the community. This was later echoed by the neoliberal leader herself, Thatcher. She retorted that there was no such thing as a society, and this Randian neoliberal way of viewing the world was cemented when the Berlin Wall fell. Liberal democracy had won, and the end of history was declared. Human freedom knew no bounds. The individual was king. Now, this very rudimentary history of consumer capitalism is needed to contextualize and elaborate on my first point. This was that it was intentional. The inception of the world atomizes what we see now, people endlessly plugged into the virtual world, terminally online, distracted and pacified. Though the people who conceptualize this world are long gone, the children of the world they created and their followers who have lived in this illusory matrix now belong to the older generation, the Gen Xers and up. They perpetuate the status quo they inherited, intentional in implementing government policy, but perhaps unintentional in their motivations. Hence why I said if it was intentional or not, yes and no. Anyway, what is clear is that we have lost our anchor to the world in which duty, meaning, and community as norms are gone. Now we all live in a dog-eat-dog world. The forefathers of consumer-driven capitalism and individuation had no foresight as to how this world would contort and morph into the world that we see today. But it did, and that's where we stand. This brings me on to my second point. Second modernity and the rise of the individual has left us atomized and in competition with one another. The problem isn't that we can't be who we want to be fully. It's that we don't know who or what we want to be. Fads and dreams, phases and pipe dreams occupy our minds. Sometimes these dreams are dictated for us thanks to the overreaching, unbounding power of surveillance capitalism. Sometimes not. Sometimes our dreams are primal and simple, to travel the world, to fall in love, or to simply be without the bullshit of city life drowning out every impulse to do good. Either way, our paralysis of choice, defined by a surplus of consumption, media, and entertainment, has left us wandering, or even scrolling endlessly for an answer to it all. So, to address these themes on the podcast, I will address my own problems of distraction and stimulation in 3 short parts. The inherent problem is so complex in its nature, I think it would warrant a short book to go through all the issues in depth. Instead of addressing the issues in their totality, I will address them in the sum of their parts, addressing the 3 main stands: why, what, and how. That is, why do I, or maybe we, feel the need and or strong desire to distract and stimulate? What is the nature of these distractions and stimulations? And finally, how can we either accept or overcome the incessant need to distract and stimulate? First things first, why do I, as being self-reflective as I can be, feel the need to distract and stimulate? Now, there are many underlying themes that could be present here: depression, boredom, anxiety, etc. But I feel they're all part of the same encompassing feeling of being in a state of perpetual existential crisis. Existence is fickle. It has no meaning, it has no purpose. Yet we derive our wildest dreams, ambitions, and radical ideas on the notion that indeed they are meaningful and purposeful. After all, I think we can all agree to act and not to succumb to the weight of existential inquiry. It's essential. That would in part explain why distraction is even more tantalizing. In a godless world, the cruel indifference of the universe is evident, but to ponder on this for too long would just result in perpetual misery. So, we like Sisyphus must press on, despite the futility of it all. It could be that distraction and stimulation is our way of saying, fuck it. What does it matter after all if I sit in my own filth, gorging on junk and endlessly browsing stupid facts on the occult with no intention of utilizing or using knowledge for any just cause or purpose? Well, if it was harmless and if it was good, that is something I could very well spend my life doing. I would in turn also feel good about doing it. But it doesn't. I feel like shit. I feel guilty and even more depressed for doing so. The minuscule amounts of dopamine, serotonin, or other neurological goodies fade as quickly as they rise. There is no long-term gain from such sloth. It is a servitude to nihilism, a who gives a shit mentality, and it doesn't, for me, at least stand up for very long. Taking the issue of why we distract and stimulate to a broader level, I think it's good to look on the macro level, toward the sociological landscape. I'll start with the second modernity. The second modernity is a phrase coined by the German sociologist Ulrich Beck. It is the epoch that falls after the first modernity, hence the name. The first modernity was defined by the breakdown of agricultural society and the rise of the industrial society, so late 19th and mid 20th century. The first modernity is defined by the lineated industrial culture. Think culturally prudish and conventional, yet at the same time unfathomable progress for machinery and technology. Second modernity, therefore, begins around the 1960s. After industrial society had shaped the world in turn became more reflexive and dynamic, an age that Beck defines as risk society, a risk that churns out promises to protect us from risk, both social and natural. And in turn, we can concentrate on being, well, ourselves. The rise of leisure focuses us away from the dangerous elements in order to indulge our individual nature. We are led into this epoch, which again roughly started in the 1960s, as a means to focus on ourselves. This indulgence of individuation in turn pushed us away from an altruistic communal society. It's worth noting that this isn't all bad. The second modernity moved us all away from the boundaries imposed upon our identity markers. The 1960s, for example, saw radical progress on the perception of gender, race, familial heritage, and even the nation-state to embrace a more globally unified benchmark of equality. Beck would define this age as the one of reflexive modernity. Reflexive modernity allowed us to strive towards an age where we prioritize the immaterial over the material. Think internet over books, the increasing irrelevance of the nation state, like corporations or the UN over a government, and cultural globalization over economic globalization. Think the Americanization of, well, everything. But whilst a lot of good came from this time of roaring social cultural change and the age of reflexive modernity also compounded with consumer capitalism, the age of the individual and the endemic atomization of society. So, let's back up and summarize for a second. The age of what Beck refers to as the second modernity, risk society, indicated a huge shift of focus away from the communal toward the individual, away from the normal calamities that plagued human life for millennia: famine, war, disease, sudden death, etc. We grew confident in our aversion to risk, confident in individual liberty. We were truly free to be whoever we wanted, as opposed to the first modernity, whereby a collective ruling culture of prudishness meant people couldn't be who they wanted. Think a closeted gay man, or race being a key signifier of a person's worth, and also much of the developed world was entrenched in poverty. The 60s, though, while still marred with deep poverty for much of the developed and pretty much all the developing world at least, socio-cognitively opened a new plane, the age of the individual. Yes, the 60s were a time when dropping LSD, asking questions, embracing a roaring counterculture, and accepting the quirky, weird, and dynamic part of human nature became normalized. And because of that consequential decade, a liberation from the prudist, aristocratic ideal that we'd lived under for centuries was realized. Now, fast forward to now. Still, my add is considered the reflexive age of modernity. The roaring cultural upheaval has simmered down. We are still in the debt of the generation that tore down cultural norms, yet the world has become a sanguine, standardized carbon copy, a far cry from the desire to break away and progress. Our individuated indulgence that was crucial in tearing down old perceptions of sex, race, class and gender are now dictated by the corporate capitalists that took hold in the 70s and 80s. The now seemingly eternal neoliberal economic project has made everything a sterile and bland landscape. The age of the individual that was unleashed on the world through consumption capitalism has stirred an unsettling feeling within us. We feel, or at least I do, identical, inconsequential, and following the same lineated path as everyone else. After years of justifiably fighting for equality, our identity markers mean as little to me as they should. And yet there is without a doubt an individual in me that is as unique as the person next to me on the train. You listening to this, wherever in the world, would have within you a roaring, unique voice. Different to mine or anyone else's. You feel differently, are excited by different things, and motivated for different reasons. But in a world where we are terminally online, we become socially stunted. It is increasingly hard for you or me to convey who we are. So we look for our identity markers online. I share, therefore I am. And thus, the distraction continues. The stimulation of likes, retweets and shares cause a minor spike of dopamine, a transient, fleeting sense of acceptance of who we are that is minuscule to real human connection. We are unified by our atomization and alienated states. Much of our individuation and societal ideology has been dictated primarily by only a few individuals, who ironically harness their raw individualization to change the world and impose a stale, vacuous socio-cultural landscape in which we should define ourselves within. They are figures such as Milton Friedman, who materialized the concepts put forth by Ayn Rand, as well as the neoliberal elite, particularly Thatcher and Reagan, who then implemented the ideals of Friedman and Rand onto all of us. Now, into the 21st century, our individual lives are put in direct competition with one another. Me, you, and even your loved ones are thrown into societal stew, forced to fight for places of importance, relevance, and success. And this is what can lead us to what we can call a what the fuck is the point attitude. 7 billion strong, a calamity of mass competition, all striving for finite positions within social hierarchies. So we go through the motions, pipe dreams and fads. Pipe dreams are what we see helping us achieve the stage of self-actualization, work and life in harmony, a balance of ikagi, a fully rounded individual with a contented life to match. The fads dictated by marketing ploys, surveillance capitalism, behavioral modification, and market are sprinkled throughout TV, media, and the society of the spectacle, all designed to make you feel you chose who you are, who you would become. These same ploys then dictate how you will show the world who you are. So, to the question. Who am I, or rather, what person do I want to convey to everyone else? It's a crisis of identity. So why the ramblings? What does all this age of individual second modernity bullshit factor into why we distract and strive to stimulate? In short, the distraction from the inherent meaningless of it all, the incessant pressure to achieve, work hard and climb conceptual hierarchies to show you're a worthy member of society is, well, mentally taxing. The distraction is the stimulation. If I can tune out and watch a TV series' character arc rather than work on my own, of course the reward is infinitely smaller, but the alternative to graft, grind and die to prove to others I am well worthy is a lot of effort. A lot of meaningless effort. Slight rushes of dopamine in the media over the long term. Graft and hard work of creating a life is, well, endlessly tempting. But the thing is, squandering that roaring individual voice I mentioned earlier, that is the real injustice. You in your existence defy the carbon copy landscape out there. It is imperative that it shouldn't be extinguished, no matter how tempting it may seem in the immediate. Another answer, or maybe theory, why we distract and stimulate ourselves is that we simply do it as a minor form of resistance. What is the point attitude, manifested as a direct retaliation against the onslaught of dictation from marketing, economic systems, and the aggressive anti-altruistic stance propagated as the right form of living. A perversion of the tune in and drop out is tune out and drop out. Fuck it. Let it burn. A harnessing of the universe's cruel indifference targeted against the system that keeps us perpetually distracted and pacified. This brings me to another way of interpreting the need to distract and stimulate in the face of this social calamity. That is optimistic nihilism. What is optimistic nihilism? The words seem to juxtapose one another. Oxymoronic yet totally conceivable. A few months ago, I stumbled on a beautifully made Kurtzikat video. If you haven't checked out his channel, I would recommend you do ASAP. He has a ton of cool videos that explore everything from string theory to the importance of gratitude. Anyway, one of the videos I saw was titled Optimistic Nihilism. The premise of such is that there is ultimately no point to anything. Everything we do is redundant in the face of endless change, entropy and inevitable annihilation. We will die. Our legacies as a species in millennia will also die. The sun will implode, any remnants of heat will fade and the solar system will collapse. We will orbit a black hole, the universe will eternally expand and dead heat will kick in, where nothing changes forever. Where is the optimism in all of this? Well, simply put, by subverting the existentialist argument put forth by Camus and Sartre, who observed that we are condemned to be free. That is, we are free to do what we please, but we are also burdened by the choices we have made. If we decide to start smoking, for example, we will have a life of cravings. If we decide to pursue our parents' dreams over ours, we bear the life of regret. You get the idea. Well, optimistic nihilism offers a remedy to this existential conundrum. Quite simply, the video puts forth the reminder that yes, we have a limited time on this planet, but there is also no preordained expectation for us to fulfill. Optimistic nihilism reconciles these two facts and assures us to remember that maybe all of this isn't made for us. Our existence is forgotten eventually. Every bad thing that happens to us or people we know will perish in the cold death of the universe's end. Our lives, solipsistic and solitary, is the only thing we will ever know. Yet we are part of everything. We are as much as the universe as a neutron star or a zipping atom. We should do what we enjoy. Hedonism as a guide, morality as a tool, and altruism as an ethic. Everything, it seems, is inconsequential. Thus, why not spend our time wasting away on our phones or on the internet, scrolling, and scrolling? The problem is, I believe we have all internalized this very message. Thus, why we distract is to avoid the face of existential calamity, burden, and responsibility that ensues. Yes, optimistic nihilism gets us halfway there. For me at least, while there is nihilism and the burden of the existential conundrum, we have within us all a harrowing angst concerning our mortality. Distracting and stimulating is succumbing to this overriding angst, as well, in the short term, remedying it. It is accepting the inevitable. Everything we do has no point anyway. Therefore, the distractions and stimulations are the optimistic nihilistic theory manifested. It numbs and soothes the angst within us. It allows us to momentarily forget. but making a choice endlessly to remove ourselves from reality, from boredom and the larger questions that inflict us, like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Burdens us a lot more. So in essence, distraction and stimulation, chemically or not, is a way of coping. No, numbing ourselves to the existential dread, reconciling optimistic nihilism with its pessimistic counterpart. What point is there to it? And why not let me do what I enjoy? The problem, of course, is we often don't know exactly what is good for us. We are, after all, creatures of coercion, societal, civil, peer, and familial coercion. We are as much ourselves as we have deluded ourselves to be. We want to do what we enjoy. Distraction and stimulation seem to be the things we somewhat enjoy. But slowly life slips away and we realize instead of addressing any nagging thoughts with a practical solution, we have withered away into a stagnant abyss of social media, alcohol, drugs, fad fashion, junk food, and binging TV shows. Incremental, insignificant serotonin hits that have allowed us momentary bliss, eschewing us from self-actualization. Now, with all that said about distraction and stimulation, we need to briefly look at the real-world ramifications from the induced docility and pacification we've garnered from endlessly being distracted and stimulated. I believe this pacified, docile state has cued an infantilized longing for an authoritative figure to lead us through the wreckage. Cue Trump, Xi Jinping, Putin, Brexit, nationalism, political correctness, political tribes and divides, voices of authority and order, telling us how to think, coercing us to be free, free to indulge, free to avoid risk, free to hibernate safely in their arms, and above all else, free to submit in the warm embrace of endless distraction and stimulation, passing each day in quiet desperation, soothed only by the pings, ticks, clinks, and illusory tricks our mind has played on us that we are free, doing what we wish. A first step is addressing the reason why we feel compelled to distract ourselves and entrench our own lives into one of stimulating simulation. I believe, anecdotally of course, it stems from the turbulent mind. A turbulent mind that has been shaped and contorted by a very hyper-stimulated and fast-paced world. Decades of developments seemingly happen within weeks apart. The technological singularity seems only moments away. Our brains, accustomed still to the looming threats that lurk in the crevices of nature, are now hyper-focused all the time on a myriad of stimuli and scantily neon-lit signs demanding our attention. So what results? The sum of the hyper-real world and a primitive brain is a perpetually turbulent state of mind. Privacy, peace, and quiet have gone from being the norm to a luxury. It's estimated that today 4 billion people are living in urban dwellings. The bustle, the noise, and beats of the urbanized masses are becoming taxing on our brain. So where do we go to escape? To the refuge of our distractions and stimulations. Distractions from the chaos, stimulations we can control and shape willingly, expressing our desire for free will in an action determined by the environment we're immersed in. A quick remedy for our turbulent mind and racing thoughts. But what I think is a better remedy, something engaged with often enough, relinquishes the desire to distract and stimulate entirely, or at least repurposes the distraction towards a more noble pursuit. What is a soothing remedy, I believe, is confronting the thoughts themselves. Now, to get a little abstract and metaphysical, what are thoughts exactly? If you stop and notice your thoughts, are they external or internal to us? Noticing and observing thoughts, or metacognition as it is known as, is one defining tool of humankind that firmly differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. It is in the space between thinking and thinking about what you are thinking is the state of metacognition. And it is in this space that some of our most incredible moments happen. Creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, divergent thinking, and philosophical inquiry are all bred in the planes of metacognition. Taking a thought, breaking it into components, smashing it again and again, atomizing each idea and rebuilding it has been the cornerstone for the development of our species. Essentially, asking why to the most accepted and arbitrary thoughts has led us to optimize each component of our existence into being. So return to the main question here. What are our thoughts? I like Duncan Trussell's breakdown of them. And if you haven't, please go and check out his podcast, Duncan Trussell's Family Hour. He's an awesome, enlightened soul that gets into the most meaningful conversations with ease. A true conversationist. He frames the epistemological breakdown of our thoughts as a space we can call the obserververse. We are simultaneously the creator of our thoughts and the observer of those thoughts. The duality of our mind. We contemplate ourselves as we exist continually, parallel to the contemplation. In the ether that exists between the thoughts, emotions, and our mind's eye, observing it all in its totality is the illusory self. That is what makes you, you. Essentially, the illusion of self is the abstraction between the observer and the observed, the thinker and the thoughts, thinking as we watch ourselves thinking. The self is coalesced around the thoughts and the observer simultaneously. Consciousness, the biggest mystery that puzzles modern-day scientists, can be understood as a thing that permeates through all three: the illusory self, thoughts, and the mind's eye observing the thoughts. Sorry, I think I'm blabbing on too much here. I think I've lost you. Anyway, it's hard to convey trippy shit sometimes. My point is that this trifecta of components that forms consciousness is a turbulent and puzzling phenomenon. It has no beginning and no end throughout your life, but there is one way to stop its overwhelming presence: to sit back and observe these thoughts. Take solace in the observations. Each thought, regret, memory, wish, desire, urge, emotion, idea, and dream that arises should be left to arise, noted, and it will subdue. This is the infinite present moment, a mindful practice to keep yourself rooted in the now, not in the abstractions of the past and future. As Eckhart Tolle said, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. It's true. When the urge comes, distract and stimulate. Stay rooted and observe as you see your thoughts race and float past you. The idea of being rooted, of being still, brings me to my next point to help tackle the desire to distract and stimulate. The idea of stillness. The idea of stillness that I'm referring to is popularized by travel writer and thinker Pico Iyer. He refers this esoteric state as the art of stillness in his book, The Art of Stillness: Adventures in Going Nowhere. The book puts forth the idea of sitting still, exploring and traversing the inner sanctum of our mind's eye. He begins the text with an encounter with the late Leonard Cohen. They are in a reclusive cabin far away from the civilized world, reflecting together on the calm racket of crickets clicking in the empty night sky. The message is simple, but in our quick-paced times is often forgotten. We can put so much into ourselves if we just sit and reflect. Worth noting, Pico Iyer's book also echoes another great modern thinker, Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton, in his awesome YouTube channel, The School of Life, puts forth a remedy that I've always found useful: to use memories as a tool of mental pilgrimage. Go back to them, think of them, and utilize them as a tool of escapism from the world we're in now to a world we occupied before. Our mind is often on a repetitive loop, fixating on the past, fluctuating between moods of regret or nostalgia, or focusing on the future with anticipation, excitement, or dread. And in the present, we are either in a state of alertness or adrift in daydreams. Botton puts forth the idea of how we can use our mental capacities to pursue these mental pilgrimages. Botton refers to this as the adventure to nowhere. Similarly, the Iyer refers to too. Think of all your memories. Choose any single memory and develop it. Maybe a time you're on a beach in a foreign country. What could you hear? What could you see? What were the surroundings like around you? Could you smell anything? How was you feeling? Why was you feeling this way? Could you remember what you were wearing? Any cuts, marks, or anything else? Now keep pushing the memory. Give it depth and keep pushing. Keep pushing and keep pushing. These memories exist in your inner mind's eye. All your time invested into your experiences are for this very point, to use as part of your growth. Sit still and explore the adventure of the memories of your own inner sanctum. In its infinite depth, You can often distract yourself for hours in both the meditative state of stillness and exploration, a distraction and a stimulated mind while remaining in a cool, pleasant state. Again, you need to understand that the world is moving light years faster than our predecessors. We live in an overstimulated and overactive society, constantly throwing us breaking news segments, pings from our social media accounts, porn, sugar, TV shows, and glossy fashion magazines. It is a world that would be unfathomable to our ancestors. Our attention flinches and alternates between different stimuli momentarily. All this compounded with the fact that we still have the brains that compute similarly now as they did 10,000 years ago on the plains and savannas of the ancient world. We compute the odds of success, drive, and ambition to survive against the backdrop of the comfortable, easy, and convenient lives we lead. It helps to frame and compare some questions from a Neolithic versus modern man point of view. Why hunt when we have a surplus? Why try when we're already rewarded? Why go out when the world is right there at your fingertips? Why look for partners when sex can be satisfied through porn, AI, and VR? Why take risk when we could lose our solipsistic, comfortable, yet meaningless existence? So, how do we get here? What seems to be the problem? Time for some anecdotal reflection on my own time with this phenomenon. Long ago, I reflected on this very predicament. I wrote down that distraction and stimulation are the two biggest vices. Everything else, drugs, masturbation, sex, hookups, messaging friends, drinking, junk food, approval, validation, watching TV or YouTube or whatever the fuck was on TV, and smoking weed were all the children of these two vices. A need to distract and a need to stimulate. It seemed all the biggest and perhaps necessary changes I wanted to make in my life were being obstructed by this core problem. A bug in my body's computation. Since my adolescence, and perhaps even before that, I've sought a temporary suspension of reality, be it through daydreams, drugs, or the internet. I've scurried away into a microcosm of this world, one defined by a denial of this reality and of minuscule dopamine fixes, moving away from resolving that core bug that seems to be at the root of a multitude of other problems. But on reflection, I was able to ask myself some fundamental and stirring questions. Where is my expression of creativity? That is, I believe everyone in the world walks on a fine line between destructivity and creativity. What am I doing to sway the balance to one of more noble pursuits? What am I doing to benefit myself or others? As the Egyptian gates of the afterlife, the people trying to enter the heavens were often asked about the feather of justice. Did your life bring you joy? And did your life bring joy to others? I've always found pinnacle wisdom in these ancient myths, and I believe this is a remedy for a worthwhile life. Despite the tenets of an existential, meaningless existence, we are without a doubt all sharing the same space. And in this space, I believe it is important to ask questions. The questions I ask myself and the ones I implore you to ask too. What am I doing to improve myself continually? Obviously, a real goal of perfection is never attained, but a road to perfection is. Burdened to be internally imperfect, but condemned to keep trying. And a state of contentment is attainable. It's a stage on that path. Am I the man I can fully be? Am I maximizing my potential, or am I squandering it on worthless momentary bliss? As well as asking these questions, it's also worth meditating on the idea that this life is all we have. It is the only life we will ever know. Memento mori. Am I living up to the very pinnacle of my own being, or am I floundering in the face of crippling indifference, or as I referred to earlier, what's the point-ism? Am I optimizing all parts of my life? That isn't just productivity. It encompasses health, diet, sleep, work, personal finance, creativity, cleanliness, relationships with friends, family, and even strangers. Maybe distraction and stimulation are more inevitable than we choose to acknowledge. Change how we react to them. Accept them. Unplug. Set a time once in the evening. Every evening. Turn it all off. TV, phone, laptop, tablet. Put the junk food away and stimulate and distract with rewarding substitutes. Like changing pizza to pita with feta and tomatoes. Listen to music. Think and daydream. Draw, write, read, and escape and embrace more beautiful, less insidious forms of distractions and stimulations that illuminate parts of your soul that have been dulled by the unimaginative tech utopians. These pursuits, ponderings, and mantras are too all distractions. They serve the same function as more malignant distractions, such as drugs, social media, and junk food. But they differ in the fact that the neurochemical hit from these worthy pursuits will linger far longer than the transient hits of momentary hedonistic indulgences. They all distract from the meaningless, nihilistic fate of the world, but worthy pursuits sow worthy rewards. They still distract and stimulate, but to a far worthier cause. So, could it not be said that optimizing your own pursuit of distraction and stimulation isn't a way to remedy the problem, more a way to harness the need to distract and stimulate toward a greater good? It's compounded with these central questions. Am I working towards achieving all parts of my life? Am I working at the best level I can? These are questions that are all derived from asking the very poignant and transformative questions I have had to ask myself. Why do I distract myself? It's a very pertinent problem that I've had for most of my life, but the solution is within the questioning of the very problem itself. What seems to be the simplest answer originally was to avoid answering these questions. Yet these questions I've laid out for you are questions I have meditated upon and will continue to address daily and dutifully until my last steps on this planet are taken. It's both my role within a society, as a member of a family, and as an individual. The duties I should be fulfilling and the ambition I should be nurturing. Distracting and stimulation aren't inherently evil, just what they're channeled toward can be. I used to think ultra successful people didn't distract, but now I think about it more, they do so. More than I do, to a higher and more potent level. They do not face the futility of the universe or death or even the meaningless in any of it. They distract themselves from that reality beautifully. They indulge in their pursuits, their work, and utilize distraction not as a destructive force, but one of creative pursuits. I think that for me, at least, distractions and stimulations are perhaps inevitable. A pursuit in almost any way is a distraction, and it leads to a worthwhile reward. It can be categorized as a stimulation. And whilst a lot of these distractions I've indulged in have left me disaffected and indifferent, there are some remnants of hope. If, like me, you tend to distract continually and search for those minuscule dopamine hits that are littered pretty much fucking everywhere in today's day and age, then there's an emblem of hope. It certainly doesn't have to be an immiserating indulgence and a wasted life. The need to distract and stimulate, that is to reap rewards, chemically or not, is a force within you that can be harnessed towards a greater and more noble pursuit. So, I would like to end this self-reflective inquiry on a high optimistic note, to maybe inspire someone to see a way out, or to compound this whole podcast into an endless pile of preachy self-help bullshit. Either way, wrapping up, I would like to quote a quote from the second Trainspotting movie. Kind of sums up a lot of what I've been rambling on about quite nicely. There's a scene where Renton, the main character in the movie, is talking to Spud about being an addict. He tries to remedy his friend's concerns about being condemned with an affliction of being an addict. And Renton says, "You are an addict. If you're going to be addicted to something else." I like this quote a lot, but instead of addict, I'll rephrase it to distracted. It shows that what blights us needn't be that way, fatalistically. There is some agency to it. You can use the bugs in your own computation as a remedy to the bugs themselves. Anyway, thank you for listening to this rambling madman. I'll put this into the effort of the internet, and if you're listening, thank you. That means a lot. Please visit highcoop.com to read the show notes of the episode. Also, some suggested readings, YouTube channels, and any other interesting thing will be in the curation part of my website. Thanks again, and until next time, peace out.